So we've looked at while loops. We played a little bit with the pie game. I want at this point to look at another type of loop. It's still a loop, which means that it lets us repeat a line of code, but we call this a for loop. And the way a for loop works, and let me write a comment here right above it, is that we use this keyword for, and then the syntax is a little different than a while loop. Okay, we say for x. Now x could be y, it could be I, it could be in, well, not in, excuse me, p, anything really for x in, and then we basically make a list of numbers. So we could put a set of square brackets and put numbers like 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we can say for x in this list of numbers that I have here, print x. Because I want you to notice what x happens to be. And if I run this, it prints the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. And that's because x is going to take every value in my list, every single value. So x will be 1, and you do print whatever x is, and then x will be 2, and then print whatever x is, x will be 3, so on and so forth. And so say you want to loop 10 times, you would write here 5, 6, 7, so on and so forth. But then you can see how, what if you want to loop 100 times? You wouldn't want to write the entire list of numbers 1 through 100. Another key note here, or something else to note, is that we could actually write, instead of square brackets, we could put parentheses, and this would still work fine. Instead of I enclose this in parentheses, that still works fine. As a matter of fact, we could actually get rid of the parentheses or the square brackets, and Python knows exactly what we're trying to do here. It still has no problem. So it still basically prints a total of 7 times. Notice that I only have one print command on line 7, but we printed 7 times. And that's because the for loop, once again, is looping and looping and looping and looping until it's done. Now let's get back to the fact that what if we want to loop 100 times? So there's just whatever reason we want to loop 100 times. Well, then you start saying, okay, well, is there a quicker way to make a list of numbers? So how can I make a list of numbers without having to explicitly write the list? Which then we get into this function called the range function. Now the range function requires at least 2 arguments. Well, at least 1, but we'll look at 2 just for clarity. We can say, hey, let's make a list that starts at 1 and goes all the way to 100. And then if we add a third argument, like meaning a third number, this is by how much we want to increase my list. So you can go by ones, which would be the default, meaning if you don't include a third number, you're going to basically make a list of the numbers 1 through 100, going by ones. But if you do include a third argument, you can go by 2s if you want, or you can go by 3s, or 5, however much you want. So right here, we're making this range of numbers between 1 and 100, and x is going to be every number in that range. So x will be 1, 2, 3, and notice how it prints 90 all the way to 99. Well, I should note that this last number here is what we say non-inclusive, which means that you go from start at 1 and you don't quite get all the way to 100. You get to 1 before that. So if you do want to go to all the way to 100, then you would put 101 instead. So 1 more than what you want. So a for loop works again very much like this. We're not restricted to just printing whatever x is. As a matter of fact, we could do something that doesn't involve X at all. So we could print, hi, how are you? Let's just say that we want to print this 5 times. We can do a range between 1 and 5. However, once again, if we do between 1 and 5, we'll never actually quite get to 5. So we would have to increase this by 1. And now X is going to be every number in our range, 1, 2, 3, which means that we're going to be looping that many times. But we're not going to be printing what X is. Instead, we're going to just print hi a total of 5 times. So we are still looping. It looks a little different than a while loop. Let's make sure that we understand the fact that this is a little different than a while loop. But we are still, for example, if I was to do the GPA calculator, just like we did before, where we need to store the grade point, we are going to expect an integer value, and so I'll enclose this in the integer, the int function, and I would do something like enter the grade point for the next class. Right? So I'm just basically replicating the implementation. I'm forgetting here a set of parentheses because I'm not balanced. There we are. I'm replicating what we did with the grade point. We could ask first for the number of classes. So num classes is equal to what the user enters when I ask the user how many classes are you enrolled in. Don't forget your extra set of parentheses there. And I can make X be the range of numbers for X in the range of 1 to whatever num classes is. However, remember once again that num classes, say the user enters six classes. So this would be from 1 to 6. But the way the range function works is that it gives you a list of numbers not quite from 1 to 6. And we can test this by doing the following here. Going to the Python shell and doing the range function, put 1 through 5. Let me see if I can print this. Okay. So I wanted to see if I could actually print all the numbers here. But let me show you here really quick. So I looked it up right here really quick. This is the range function. All I did was just write range Python. And I clicked on this first link here. And it gives me an example. If you give it, use the range function with just one number, it starts at 0. So you don't specify where you want to start. It starts at 0. And it goes all the way up to 5. And then if you use the range function where you give it a start, a stop, and then the step, meaning how much are you incrementing by, it will start at whatever you specify, and it says starting 0 by default and increments by 1 by default, and stops before the specified number. So meaning it won't stop if I do 1, 6, then it will start at 1, but it will stop 1 before 6, so that would be 5. And this again right here required an integer number specified at which position to stop, not included, meaning you don't ever get to that number. And once again here, the 3 to range 3, 6 gives me the range of numbers between 3 and 5. And so my point is that when I put num classes here, if the user enters the number 6, then we won't ever get to 6. We'll start at 1. And if you count with your fingers and you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's 5 times that I'm going to ask on line 9. but I should ask 6 times because I have 6 classes. And you can run it and test it for yourself so that you can see that we are indeed not going to get all the grade points. How many classes are enrolled in? If I put 6, I'm only going to ask 5 times. You can count them right here. 3, 5. Which means that I need to do, I can work this many different ways, but I could say num classes plus 1. So go 1 more than num classes. Or I could start at 0 instead and just go to num classes. And that would work because I would start at 0 and I would go, if this is 6, I would go all the way up to 5. And again, with your fingers, you count 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You will ask a total of 6 times. Now, by default, if you don't include the starting position, then you automatically start at 0. And so this actually would work just as we wanted to do, work without so much implementation, without so many arguments here. Now, the way GPA worked was we said, well, we need to add the grade points every time the user answers something. Let me put a space here, by the way. This bothered me a little bit. Every time the user enters a grade point, it gets stored in this variable. And that means we're losing that grade point. We're replacing it every time. And so we're going to store that in a variable called sum. I can't call it sum because it's a reserved word. Sum, which I'm going to start at 0. And I'm going to say that after I ask for the grade point, I want to add that grade point to sum. And this is how we do it. We say sum is equal to sum plus the grade point. Whatever the user enters, let's say they enter 4, that's going to be 0 plus 4, which is 4. But then on the next iteration, if the user enters a 3, sum is now 4 plus 3 is 7. And it keeps adding and adding and adding. And lastly, we get to the end of our loop where we then divide to get the GPA. We say that's sum divided by number of classes. And then finally, we just print your GPA is a, and then we can terminate this and put a comma here and then put whatever GPA comes out to be. So again, the implementation, the GPA calculator you've worked on, I just want to show you how you would do this with the for loop. We can run this, and I'll put 4 here to just shorten our time here. So a 4, a 5, a 4, and a 5. That should be a 4.5. And it does indeed give me a 4.5. But the biggest takeaway here in this tutorial is the for loop. We say for x. Notice that I didn't use x inside at all in this implementation. So I don't have to. If I needed the numbers 1 through 6 to show up somewhere, or maybe I wanted to multiply them or something, then I could put use x. For x in the range of numbers from 0 to 6, not including 6, so that would actually be 0 to 5. Let's execute lines 10 and 11 repeatedly. So we're looping and looping and looping until we get to the end. Then we've added all the grade points to sum. X does not have to be X. It could be Y. It could be I. It can be anything except for any reserved word. And you know, when you have a reserved word, when you type it, it changes color. So a look at for loops, you'll see how you'll actually be working on an assignment where you actually have to use where I want you to use a for loop to implement that application.